Tell us about that photo. Is there a story behind it? What sort of equipment did you use? Welcome to Through the Lens of Faith, 135 years of Courier Photojournalism podcast, where we're getting the stories behind some of the photos that will be on display in a Catholic Courier photo exhibition this October. Now, here are your hosts, Gina Capilazzi and Rebecca LeClaire. Loret Steinberg taught documentary work, photojournalism, ethics, photojournalism, picture editing, and page layout and other courses at the Rochester Institute of Technology.
And this is a really exciting part, I think, of your history. In 2016, a recipient of the Robin F. Garland Educator Award, and that's given by the National Press Photographers Association. So the honor definitely given for outstanding service as a photojournalism educator.
And joining her today is one of her former students, my coworker, Jeff Witherow, who is the chief photographer at the Catholic Courier.
Yeah, so we're going to have this great conversation. I'm so excited to talk to, not only the educator, the mentor, the teacher, but the man who's out there doing it every day for the Catholic Courier. But let's start off with, maybe let's get some definitions of what photojournalism really means to you and to you, because it might be a little different, but just so our audience will understand what we're talking about. Do you want to start, Jeff?
Absolutely. For me, photojournalism is something, it's of course something I'm passionate about, but it's something I really hunger for. If there goes a period of time where I haven't gone out and covered stories, told some stories, taken some photos, I get itchy.
I'm going to remember that next time I give you an assignment.
But it's true. It's really something you're called to. It wasn't something I planned on. It's something I stumbled into. So I think that's part of that calling, that you have to go out and seek this.
And Loret, is there a definition for photojournalism in your heart that you could express to the audience?
Oh, there are a number of definitions of photojournalism, but the simplest statement is that a photojournalist uses a camera to tell stories that have authenticity. Jeff certainly knows it. I know it through my own work too, that all photojournalists have a responsibility to remember that they're representing the eyes and presence of the person who cannot be there. And, I would even remind students of that. Just, okay, you're looking at this really cool picture, or this is happening, or, you're trying to figure out what's going on as you're looking at something. Remember that that person who's right behind your shoulder needs to know. And so use your camera so that you can most clearly express what it is that you witness. So we're witnesses for other people.
And I like that you said that we're the eyes for other people, because that's been one of the favorite parts of my job, is that I get to go see the things that other people want to go see, but they can't be there. So it's opened the door for many experiences personally.
And I think photojournalists also are inherently curious people.
Absolutely.
You want to know.
Yes.
Show me. What's your life all about? Share your stories. I want to know. Yeah. So that's good to hear you say that, Jeff.
Well, what about, the difference between, we've got photography. And yes, we're talking journalism, telling a story that way. But the differences between still photography and videography, what is your preference? What gets you going? What do you like the most?
What I like about photography is that you have to tell the story in a single image, in a single moment. It might be a 60th of a second or 100th of a second. And you try to capture that one instance. With video, you get, maybe a few minutes to get your point across, and with audio and an interview, but you don't get that with a photo. You maybe get a caption. So I think it's a harder job in some ways, and some ways it's easier because it is just a split second that you have to work with, and you can take so many photos that hopefully you get that in there. But I do both. I'm certainly drawn more to photography. Yes.
And I agree. I think videographers are going to explode. I think that someone who is making pictures, still photographs, really do have to be on their toes more. having done multimedia, going out and gathering bits and things that later, as you're putting it together, you go, oh, I see what this should be, and edit this out, put this in, and so on. You have to be there, fully present and engaged with what's going on. I am, in my heart, a still photographer, even though I have respect for motion media. But Jeff talked about, in that split second, making a picture. You can tell a complete story with a still photograph. The difficulty is encountering a wide variety of elements in front of you and instinctively and intuitively responding visually, moving around, using your eye, but also using your heart to engage what's there. You have to feel what's going on so that as you're putting your eye to the camera, you move a little to the left, because actually that shows more clearly the relationship between this and this and this. That shows the relationship between the foreground and the background. And then you're a split second.
It's a split second.
It all comes together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this might be a good time to mention one of the founding fathers of photojournalism, Henri Cartier-Bresson. He called it the decisive moment. So this is a concept that goes back to the very early days of the golden age of photojournalism.
And even, that decisive moment, which is sometimes misunderstood by people, they think of, the decisive moment is getting LeBron James the layup for a basket.
Yeah.
Right then. But actually, he was talking about that split second when everything in the world that you can see through the frame of your camera comes together for a split second and says something meaningful.
Yes, it's everything that's in the frame. It's not just peak action, it's everything that's in the frame.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, because photojournalism started probably with film, how has it evolved now to digital? How has it changed the way you're doing things?
I think it started well before film, because you could argue that the early days of photojournalism was mid 1800s, and they were doing war photography, the American Civil War. That was glass plates. But the golden age of photojournalism started on film. Yeah, that was 1930s. And then with digital, it only makes it easier. Photojournalism develops with technology, and it gets easier, but at the same time, it gets harder because you have more responsibilities. So with film, you might have 24 photos in a roll of film. I can take hundreds in a shoot. So it makes my job easier because, there's more photos to choose from.
The teachers have had to evolve just as much.
Yes.
Right?
Well, I was one of the earliest ones at RIT who started doing digital photography. I was fairly new faculty. And one of my colleagues, who was just like, wow, look at this, asked me if I wanted to work with him. And at some point, I stopped shooting film because I realized I have to get comfortable with this. Because up until then, I was like, I would photograph digitally and then go, film, for my own stuff and for my own jobs. But there's something really significant that I noticed in students. When students are using film, and I suspect this is true of all people, boy, that picture had to have a reason for being there. But they didn't use very many films. I would actually assign a certain number of rolls for an assignment because I'm thinking through, okay, how many times does somebody have to make a decision about how to make a picture of that before they get it, all right, before they really learn what I want them to learn. So I would have a minimum number of rolls of film. And I included exposures, not 24, I'm talking 36 guys. But with digital photography, of course, there's no price difference. And they didn't have to think of the amount of time to process it themselves if they were doing black and white, or the amount of money to process color. And man, they're like this. And at some point, they weren't learning what I wanted them to learn, which is to actually see and perceive how this in front of them is meaningful. They were allowing the camera to do it, make the decision for me. Okay, I'm going to just keep doing this. You and I were talking
I think I'm
about
guilty of that from time to time too.
Well, in certain circumstances, right?
Yes.
Right. But you actually, in a recent conversation I had with you, you mentioned something about that. You got a new camera. How many frames per second?
It's a Nikon Z8, and it can take up to 120 frames a second.
And the first thing he said is that I'm not making the pictures, the camera is.
Yeah.
And you were spot on.
Yes. I've never used that feature.
Yeah.
And that's true. A photographer doesn't really learn how to see better or to make better pictures until they're actually committed to the picture in front of them when they click the shutter. So you can see that this visual diarrhea is what I referred to it when it was first happening. Isn't necessarily improving things in terms of our seeing and knowing. Right?
I bet you a lot of people would agree with that. And, we can talk about the exhibit because you are in charge of the day-to-day for the Catholic Courier, but you also had the role of helping find the pictures that are now going to be in this exhibit to celebrate 135 years. That had to be a task.
That was a big task, yes. And I'm sorry to say our archives are not that well organized. So that made it all the more difficult. There was some photos I would find in the newspaper and I'd say, oh, you have to have that photo for the exhibit. And I couldn't find a print of it. I couldn't find a negative of it. So I had to go by the wayside, unfortunately. But it was a big undertaking. And it was a great opportunity to see how others in my role have shot the same things that I've shot for these last 9 years.
You mean masses,
Yeah.
ordinations,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I've photographed so many masses that I kind of get into a rhythm, and I start to stop seeing things. I start to stop being curious. And that's when you make your best photos, is when you're curious. So to see other people in those same situations take certain photos I haven't seen before has been inspiring. Yes.
But you can't just have all the pictures from masses. You had to make some decisions of what else are we going to see in this exhibit?
We cover a wide variety. We cover sports, of course. We also cover social justice. We cover, there's been portraiture. There's been a number of topics that we try to cover, with that Catholic perspective. We try to cover any news that's important with that Catholic perspective. So it's not just masses. It's not just, liturgical topics. Anything a newspaper might cover.
How has it evolved? I know I've been looking at some of these photos of the couriers throughout the years, and it's not just the black and white. So how have our images changed over the years?
The courier's images.
Yeah.
Very early on, it was obviously wood engravings. And then, which I could not have access to. I would have loved to, and included those in the exhibit. But, and then early on in the 1930s through, say, the 50s, what you would see in the Courier is a lot of posed photos. So they're photos, but there's not real journalistic aspect to it, or photojournalistic aspect. They're posed, and maybe it's a grip and grin shot where you're looking at the camera, or it's a straight up, maybe everybody's surrounded over a document, in a way that you would never do that in real life.
No,
yes.
It's posed.
And then it wasn't until maybe the 1970s, 1980s when you really start to see a shift in focus to telling stories with your images in the Courier. And that's where a lot of these photos in this exhibit come from. For a variety, for that reason, but also because that's the photos that we have access to.
Have you noticed a difference, though, too, in how the photography changed from those early years when people thought, oh, if I have a picture of that, that's my document of the event, to using your camera and stylistic devices and your understanding of visual representation, and which we draw from the arts, and that is the art of our photography, is we understand the relationship of visual elements more. Advertising and television have really influenced the way that viewers, readers, would engage an image. And so their expectations of that image change. You know, that they want to be in that space. They want to understand it from a more visual level. I mean, do you see some sort of parallel in that, in how it changed? And especially more color, you know, like what? You only do black and white. I think the world is black and white. Anyway.
That's a good question. That's, you know, have you felt that way? Because everything is about visuals now, right? So that's good for you because that's what you love. But just as she was saying, people kind of expect that now, and that's the way to tell the story best.
Yes, there's been a much more emphasis on those visuals, especially in recent years.
We have to address that now. That's something photojournalism didn't have to address more earlier. I still remember a Life magazine 2-page spread that just really made it clear to me. This is obviously some time ago because Life magazine, but Eugene Richards was photographing then. And on the right side was a beautiful and very powerful photograph of a migrant child in a field and looking directly at the camera, just engaged. And your eyes are drawn to that space and drawn to that child's being and how I think it was a girl, how she feels. You know, you're developing a sense of empathy and connection because of the way that he used his camera when he engaged her. On the left-hand page, which was these were both full page, was an ad for Kodak film. And there was a child, and this is where some people are looking at editors like, how could you? You know, and say, well, we don't actually plan this. Yeah, that's a problem. Was a child about the same age, dressed as a clown, and just happy as you can possibly imagine, and colorful, and, you know, I mean, just a full array of colors, almost seeming to mock this child. And the contrast was like, wow. But photographers recognize that advertising has influenced audience expectations from our photography. I mean, Annie Leibovitz and some other people, she was actually a photojournalist for a number of years. You know, and certainly her subject was somewhat narrowed, but she started using flash even in daylight and ambient light in a room. And the reason she did it is because you didn't have to deal with the shadows. You didn't have to deal with the things that flash-free photography presented. And that's what advertising also did a lot of. So guess what? Now, use flash on your camera to balance daylight. I've done it, and it's lovely, but it is not representing the way that you engaged it with your eye in a natural setting. It makes it a little slicker and prettier, right? And that's something that we face. We go back to that word authenticity. Yeah, that has changed.
Yeah, it's not always about making the prettiest looking image. It's about proper representation of the scene.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And how can you put feeling and sensibility into the image as well? You know, so that the viewer goes into the picture space and walks through it and can understand what it must have been to be there.
I want to ask this question about now cell phones have evolved so much. And everybody can be a photojournalist because they have a phone with a camera on it. How does that bother you at all? I know it would. I think it would bother me that, you know, here someone can, you know, become a photojournalist. You've gone through school. You've gone through the education. What do you do to counteract this involvement of, you know, everyone can be a photojournalist sort of thing?
Yes. It is bothersome, especially in recent years. I kind of get caught up in my own authenticity, with the matter. So I started making sure that I'm wearing my badge, to show people that I'm working, or I have 2 cameras to let them know that I'm not just some guy with a cell phone. Yeah, exactly. But I find that everybody has taken notice of that. Everybody's skeptical of having a camera in their face these days, and it's unfortunate. That's everybody has a camera, so everybody's using a camera. Nobody wants to have their picture taken. It's been difficult. I do think that the cell phones are good for reporters like yourself, because you can go out and you can tell stories with that tool as a tool, and how you use the tool is depending on the user. So for journalism purposes, it's a great tool, but everybody has access to it. So it's problematic.
I don't think there's anything to be intimidated by with so many amateurs, because they don't have the ability to see the way a professional photographer does. I mean, just because something's happening in front of your camera doesn't mean you're going to make a picture that shows what's happening in front of the camera. I won't go into the story, but I used to use some amateur photography, mostly my relatives, to show that point. What is this picture about? No, that's not why that person made the picture. Because they're trying to analyze it. It takes a professional to understand what you leave in and what you leave out, and where you stand, and what shutter speed, and what aperture, and all the other technical and aesthetic choices you make. So I don't think there's going to be any impact on professional photographers making a living and doing a good job. However, and as an aside, it's actually good and interesting that amateurs can use their cell phones, because photojournalists can't be everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we have a picture of this because somebody was there and they didn't do a totally bad job in, making a picture that shows it. So I'm okay with it. I think the audience will certainly understand at some point the difference. And if they don't, they're not really looking at the photographs.
Well, thank you, Loret and Jeff, for joining us today. This was a great conversation about photojournalism. I know you probably could talk on and on about this subject.
Absolutely.
But you can see Jeff's photos and our past Courier photographers' photos in an exhibit October 1st to the 31st. It's called Through the Lens of Faith. For more information, including times the exhibit will be available for viewing, visit our website, CatholicCourier.com/lensoffaith.